die für mich die wichtigsten sind, meine größten Gegner oder Feinde darstellen. Dieser ununterbrochenes zur Wehr setzen, gerade gegen die, denen man einfach restlos verfallen ist. Ich bin Musil verfallen, Pavese, Ezra Pound.
Hello, everybody. Wonderfully warm welcome to everybody who's come out this evening, joining us for the launch of a book that's been in the world for quite a while. So I think that there's always something wonderful about giving people time to actually read the text before we launch it. So I'm very happy to be here, and I'm going to be chairing, although it really is Leonhard's event, and I will be mostly handing over to him, and I hope he'll do most of the speaking and reading tonight. But to begin with, there are a couple of just thanks to be given, which is first of all to everybody who is here, secondly to Leonhard for putting this together, and then to KwaZulu-Natal Press, who've really organized this whole thing. And on that note, I think I'm handing over to Dr. Dlamini, who's going to be doing a little bit of a talk about from KwaZulu-Natal Press's perspective. Dr. Dlamini.
Good day, everyone. Thank you so much, Stacy. I won't actually be giving a talk because I know that there is a very good panel here of very good people that are going to be talking about the book. So my function is quite simple. It's just to thank everyone for joining in and attending this special day. A day we have been waiting for the longest of time. As you have indicated that this book has been out for a while, and we have been waiting for this special day. So we're also excited, together with our author, being UKZN Press, having published this special book. We're very excited to actually be able to launch it today. And it is always a great pleasure, to showcase work that you have been doing behind the scenes for to get the time to actually showcase it for everyone to see. So this is the birth of yet another special book by Leonhard Praeg. Congratulations, Leonhard. I think congratulations are in order. This is a very good book. It's a book that is actually needed in South Africa right now, maybe not even in South Africa, but in the whole world. So we would like to thank you and also welcome you, extend our special welcome to you, our author, on the launch of your very own book. We also would like to extend our welcome to the entire team who will be doing all the work. And we would also like to welcome the audience, because without the audience, then there is no launch. So a special welcome to the audience, and also a special welcome and a big thank you to the UKZN Press team for making all this happen. So with those few words, dear friends, dear colleagues, I would like to say, just sit back, relax, and enjoy. Let's enjoy what is going to be unfolding today. Thank you.
I always think that there's a special joy in hearing a writer read their work, and that there's something very special in the act of being read to that we experience as children and then somehow relinquish when we get older and turn into adults. It's one of those pleasures we're forced to give up. So I'm a big believer that launches are for the author and give us the opportunity to hear the book in the author's mouth. And with that in mind, I'm going to hand over to Leonhard, who is going to read a short extract from the book. And yeah, so over to you, Leonhard. Thank you.
Hi, Stacy. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
I thought you asked me to read 2 extracts from the book. And I had to think quite carefully about those because I'm eternally in a dialogue with Kundera. And I chose 2 extracts, the one that speak to different aspects of his work, I suppose. The one I'm going to read now deals with one thing that he does particularly well, and that is to use intimacy, sexuality, sex, as a key to unlock history, I suppose, ways of being and becoming. He has a fascinating way of using intimacy to unlock, history, and often for him in the scenes from his books that certainly I love most. There's something farcical about the way he describes intimacy and sexual relations. In a sense, I think because he also wants to debunk the idea that sex is so important. It is such a big thing. It's not. So on the one hand, we get kind of carried away by the burden of history. On the other hand, we just want to have fun. And he does that so spectacularly well and with such pathos that it is one of the things that certainly it's attracted me to his mind and his way of thinking about the relationship between being, history, and relationships. So I'm going to read just for now a 3-page extract from Subtle Gravity, in which I talk. It's not about imitation or emulation. It's not about copying. It's about being in dialogue with him and going, yes, you've opened a very important door in your writing. And, how do we take this forward as other writers? So this was my way of talking to him. It's about Luke and Lucy, and Luke is the central character of the novel because, in a sense, it's also a coming of age story, and this incident is about Luke. Coming to sex and sexuality and coming to gender politics and all of that. So I'm not going to say much more. So I'm on page 122. Luke arrived at the first phase of manhood prematurely. He was not yet ready for it. Or perhaps he was ready for it, but found himself in a world that lacked the generosity to allow him to be ready for it. Whichever way we look at it, Luke was out of sync with the world in a subtle yet very important way. And it was this being out of sync that lay at the origin of the suicide attempt that resulted in the near-death experience, which ended with him being committed to Dr. Cottard's facility, where he now lies on his bed, watching himself throb and relishing the sheer enjoyment of feeling life pulsing through his body, wave after wave, without any desire to have the waves crash on the shore. As often happens during moments such as this, he recalls the series of events that brought him to this point. And, as always, it is the same 3 scenes that float across his mind, like figures cast on the wall by a Japanese spinning lamp. To some degree, all 3 memories embarrass him, but this somehow never bothers him because the embarrassment always finds forgiveness in the waves of warm energy that ripple through his body. In the first scene, in which an old villager is waving a stick above his head while he's chasing a white mountain goat, Luke is 18 and still a virgin. His friend Stan's parents have gone away for the weekend, and Stan decided to invite all his friends over for a party on the Saturday evening. It is late, and everyone has had too much to drink. Lucy has been flirting with Luke all evening, and he's getting so excited that it's hard to contain himself. Just before midnight, they find a room at the far end of the house. And there, they lie down on the bed where they kiss passionately for a while. She removes Luke's shirt, and he gently unbuttons her bright orange blouse, kissing his way down her gradually exposed cleavage. By the time he undoes her bra and her breasts slip into his hands, he's almost beyond himself with excitement. They remove their pants, and he eases himself down on top of her, rubbing his erection first against her belly and then lower down until he slips in between her legs. Lucy throws her hands wide open, but he's getting lost in the world between her breasts and soon forgets about his buttocks. And as he enters her, she groans with delight, "Oh God, I just love men's cocks." The peculiar construction of her groan aside, what other kind of cocks could she be referring to? Women's cocks? Plastic cocks? In that moment, Luke feels a shudder of numbness, starting from his head, slowly seeping down his chest and leaving only numb limbs in its wake. His nipples lose their sensitivity, then his shoulders, his belly, and eventually his penis. Embarrassed and confused about the sudden and inexplicable dissipation of his sexual energy, he withdraws. Sitting on the side of the bed, he shakes his head and mumbles something of an apology. "What's wrong, Luke?" Lucy asked, pulling her legs up and covering her breast with her blouse. "I think I had too much to drink," he mumbles, pulling his pants up and reaching for his shirt. And so the scene ends, not for our two young lovers, but for us, because the rest is well known and predictable. Luke skulks out of the room and leaves Lucy behind. She falls back on the bed in frustration, and both spend the rest of the night drinking too much and avoiding eye contact. Over the next couple of weeks, they are awkward in each other's company. Once or twice, one of them will try to ease the tension with a joke about how silly people get when they have too much drink, and so on and so on. Poor, embarrassed Luke. What happened? Well, the problem was not Lucy or the alcohol. Even Luke knew that, because by the time he entered her, he was so hard he could have exploded. But then she claimed, "Oh God, I just love men's cocks." And this exclamation, far from exciting Luke, emasculated him. Instead of spurring him on with a fantasy that he represented all men and their cocks, that in Luke's eyes he was the very embodiment of the manly cock, instead of allowing himself to become cock of all ages, he went limp. It is tempting to think that he lost his erection because of the weight of expectation. I mean, what kind of man gets excited by the idea that when he makes love to a woman, he's representing all men? But it is more complicated than that, and to understand why, we have to return to the grand narrative of the penis becoming a thing, and then a myth, and then a thing again. There's a glorious moment when young boys discover the power of their erections. A moment whose beauty derives from the fact that it is pre-mythological, in the sense that the penis is not yet invested with the weight of history and patriarchy. It's a purely physical moment, devoid of any meaning. And one of the first things a boy does in this moment is to test the power of his erection against the force of gravity. He hangs a towel over his erection to see who wins. Charmed by the fact that his erection defies the combined force of gravity and the weight of the towel, he tries a damp towel, and still the body wins. After that, he tries a bigger towel and an even bigger one. Instead of using a damp towel, he now uses a wet towel, and so it goes on until eventually gravity wins. At that point, the boy comes to understand something about the pre-mythological limits of his sexual power. It is a pre-mythological moment because in that moment, he's not concerned with the meaning of his penis or his masculinity. His penis is just a muscle, and he's testing its power against gravity. But later, his body becomes the battleground of history, and slowly the penis, as pre-mythological muscle, becomes the stuff of mythology, a sword every young man is trained to wield on the battleground of the sexes. Once a boy's penis enters the mythological phase, every move he makes on the chessboard of gender politics is made on behalf of all men. His penis is no longer his own. Instead, it is what makes a man of him, what makes him belong to the category of man. And so the individual stops simply being Luke and becomes a man. One of the pawn pieces in a game in which the rules precede him and the meaning of every move is predetermined. Luke was a latecomer to this game of gender chess. Sure, he'd been aware of the game and of his place in it, but because he was still a virgin, he mistakenly believed that his penis belonged to him alone, so that when he entered Lucy, he thought it was him who was entering her. Not all men. For Luke, nothing could have been more disappointing in that moment than to be reduced to cock of all ages, to find himself representing cock. Small wonder then that all life would drain out of him and that he would go limp with what? Expectation? Did he go limp because he felt he was not worthy or man enough to represent all men? Nah, that was not it. Luke went numb with anonymity. Lucy's moan reduced him, Luke, to a man, and mythologized his cock into something that no longer belonged only to him. When Lucy moaned, "Oh God, I just love men's cocks," she draped the big, sopping wet towel of masculinity over Luke's penis, and the gravity of history won. That was me.
Thank you very much, and apologies. I made a long introduction to Leonard, but I see we've been joined by Luke instead. So thank you very much, Luke, for joining us and for speaking so eloquently on Leonard's work, and for reading some of his work. I'm very sorry he can't be with us tonight, but we're always happy to have Luke because, you know, it's a slip of a tongue from Luke to Leonard. And speaking of slips of the tongue, we're now going to do another slip and slip into Willie Burger, who's going to be speaking to us about some of the philosophical aspects of the novel, but very much in conversation with Leonard. So I'm going to, without further ado, hand over to Willie to, take it from here.
Thanks a lot, Stacy, and thanks for that reading, Leonard, and for inviting me to talk to you tonight. It's a privilege. I really enjoyed your book. At first, I really just enjoyed it, and then I sort of had second thoughts at one stage, and then I had to think a little bit to overcome my second thoughts, and I started enjoying it even more than I did at first. So, first of all, I think maybe one of the problems of being a philosopher a professor of philosophy and then writing books, novels, one of the problems is that you will probably be immediately thought of as a philosophical writer or a writer of philosophical novels. And when we talk about philosophical novels or the philosophical novel, very often it is something that many authors immediately deny. They don't want to be philosophical authors, and some others would like to be it. Some philosophers do write, and they use their writing, their novels, actually to try and make their own philosophy clearer, or try to demonstrate their own philosophy. I think of Camus or Sartre even in that regard. But sometimes some philosophers also use it to sort of develop their philosophy, and you find that very often. But when I read your novel, obviously there is a lot of what you can think of as philosophy as well, even if you just think of the philosophy of the myth of the penis that we've just listened to, and many other philosophies as we read through the novel. The one thing that came to my mind as I started thinking about this more and more and looking at your text again is the idea that Andre Brink once mentioned about Milan Kundera. And he said Milan Kundera's work is not a philosophical novel, it is story thinking. It is a way of thinking through stories and by means of stories. And this is what I think is very apt also in the case when we talk about subtle gravity, but also about imitation. What I like about it is that you do not seem to be presenting a kind of philosophy or explaining a kind of philosophy or trying to explain your philosophy by means of a novel, sort of a novelized philosophical treatise. But what we have here, and with that I would like to congratulate you. It's as if you tell a story, you create a story world, maybe even more than one story world. You lure your reader into that story world and then start thinking about the story you've just told and interpreting it. And I think part of what you've read just now is a demonstration of that. And to my mind, that distinguishes your novel from what is very often regarded as a philosophical novel. Because philosophical novels, as they are often discussed, tend to create a sort of, on the one hand, you have philosophy, and then you have a novel, and they don't seem to be very compatible, either only in the way in which a novel can demonstrate or explain a philosophy, maybe. But what I find in your work here is the same kind of feeling that the thoughts would not have been possible without the stories you tell. And I think for me, that is the most important part of how you write. You do not have a preconceived philosophy that you try to explain, but you discover what you think by telling the stories. Am I right? Is this how you experience it as well?
God, that is such a beautiful way of putting it. That what we kind of lazily think of as the philosophical thought would not have been possible had it not been for the telling of a story. It is so beautifully put. Thanks. That is absolutely spot on. And I think that is the difference between the kind of novels that you describe. The philosopher writing a novel in which he or she demonstrates, use people and characters to convey or demonstrate their ideas. And on the other hand, people who write novels who may be philosophically inspired, but they write characters and stories and they let the philosophy become what it is. The difficult thing that I think I try to do as philosopher and novelist is to do exactly what you described now, to be conscious of the philosophy you're bringing into the world, to be conscious of the fact that you are creating characters that will bring that philosophy in the world, into the world, but not to use them. Not to use them, to let them speak, and to see if they can actually bring to life this philosophy that you're thinking about. And therein lies the surprise. You know, will they or will they not?
Were you surprised by what happened with the stories that you told? Or did you have an idea where this whole thing was going to lead to?
Absolutely no idea. I didn't even think of it as a sequel to Imitation, because Imitation in my mind was architecturally so complete that I couldn't conceive of a sequel. And quite frankly, I didn't think of myself as a novelist. I didn't think, and I still don't think of myself as a novelist.
I think maybe you should start thinking about yourself as a novelist.
I think when I do, I will have nothing to write anymore. The most beautiful moment was when, you know, you kind of, if you write the way I do, you don't plan. I've never planned a book in my entire life. I've written so many, and none of them have been planned in advance. They just kind of stumble forth and happen. But if you write organically like that, there's a moment where it's a bit like a puzzle. It all comes together and you go, fuck it, I've been had. The story has been wanting to be told. And I suppose that is conveyed, or, you know, that is, comes across in the kind of writing, is that you're dealing with an author who doesn't really want to be an author. Yep.
Many of the devices that you use, the sort of novelistic devices, reminds of what was typical of the sort of postmodernist fiction of the 1980s, early 1990s. Characters from one fictional world transgressing into a different fictional world, authors crossing the borders into their own fictional world, their fictional characters coming into their own world, this kind of thing, and you make use of a lot of that. Yet for me, it does not read like one of those postmodernist novels. Although you use those devices, it seems to me like you use it a little bit differently. Am I right about that?
Yes, because that was not a conscious decision. I am, if I had to categorize myself, a postmodern philosopher. I love Derrida, I love intertextuality, I love metalepsis, I love the bleeding of worlds into each other. It's just part of the way I think. So it's not something I want to demonstrate. And the last thing that would cross my mind is to consciously set out to write a postmodern novel. I mean, it's just what you see in Subtle Gravity is just my life, how I think about life. And And I think you're right. You know, if you're going to write a postmodern novel in which you use all these tricks, it's going to be a very soulless, bloodless affair. It's going to read like intertextuality and all that nonsense. But if that way of being in the world has become part of who you are, then you can infuse it with Buddhist compassion and love and desire in a way that I think would trigger the kind of response you had. It reads as postmodern fiction, but it is also not, it's also more. So again, it's not me, it's the intention. It's the intention.
Yeah, for me, one of the big differences with other postmodernist fiction using the same devices is that there seems to be real blood and real guts and real people, and there's an emotional depth, and it makes it more human than many of those postmodernist novels where you feel that you do not really deal with people, but rather with characters that are shoved around and showed up to be merely that. And very often the sort of the human element is not there. I don't know, Stacy, if I'm allowed one more question. I would like to remark about your use of humor.
Stacy will have something to say about that.
They will know.
So I'm sorry if I jumped the gun there, Stacy, and asked your question, but for me, the use of humor is so important here. I think that makes, I mean, even just in the little bit that you've read, for those people who haven't read the book yet, you can see there's this humor, the humorous way in which you deal with things. And it seems like humor is, you use it as a way of undermining the gravity, the heaviness on the one side, but also that is exactly how you cut into the important things and into the heaviness. But sorry, Stacy, if that is what you wanted to.
No, I can happily also just come in on that, because I think it ties very much what you were saying with, you know, the books that I love most are those ones where there is a sense of spontaneity, almost a sense of improvisation, the author improvising on the page. And I always believe that writing is a form by which we discover what we know. We don't know what we know until we write, and it's through writing. So it's exactly, very vividly what you were saying, and it's for a sense in this book. And I think what's one of the things that make this book utterly extraordinary is that you really see that enacted in front of you. And humor plays an incredible role in that, because there were times, I mean, Leonard, I could be wrong here, but whenever I read this book, I kind of see it, for me, it feels like the characters kind of sneak up on you and then just throw these ridiculous jokes at you. And I can only imagine that you must have been cracking up laughing when you read this book at some moments, because some of the things that just kind of emerge spontaneously, and it's almost, you can follow the line of flight that lets that thought emerge. But then suddenly it comes and you're like, what? And that element of surprise and improvisation, and also joy, you know, Barth has this wonderful phrase, the pleasure of the text. And I think that there's a real sense of that kind of joy la vie, of the pleasure of the text, of enjoyment of the writing. And that comes out and brings a lot of the humor. So I absolutely love that. And really, very often the humor sneaks up on you. You don't expect it. And suddenly, and I suspect it sneaks up on Leonard too, as opposed to him carefully placing it to balance the many other things. I suspect you were sitting there and suddenly found himself killing himself laughing at what was just emerging. So thank you so much for that, really wonderful insights, and very much a similar kind of reading to that. But before I launch into my own, what I have to say about the book, we have an opportunity to do what I like doing best, because I'm the chairperson, so I get to set the rules. So we're going to listen to Leonard again. Sorry.
Oh, no.
Luke. We're going to listen to Luke.
No, can we skip that?
We can skip that if you'd like to. I do read a few of your. I'll read for you because I pulled out a couple of passages that I especially wanted to read. So
I don't want to read more.
Okay, no, that's fine. I will read for you as part of my talk. So I'll just keep going then. And I'm going to also beg people to excuse me. I've written down some notes on what I want to talk on, just because, well, first of all, I'm a writer, so I don't know what I know until I write it down. So I would just be stupid if I didn't write it down, and I'd be more of an idiot than I'm already being here. So forgive me if I'm reading some of this and not just spontaneously ripping off and being really cool like Willie was. But nonetheless, here we go. I mean, I think for me, one of the things that really struck me is how much you pack into this novel. And every time I revisit it, I'm just astounded because there are just so many things going on. And you're playing between so many different things that don't normally sit happily on the page. You balance lyrical descriptions with lifelike storytelling. There's deeply philosophical thought sitting next to theoretical physics. The ethical questions alongside spiritual lines of life. There's Buddhism and Christianity. There's speculative thoughts and concrete realism. There's heart-rendering existential angst and then hilarious sex. There's pop culture with literary allusion and history with absurdity. And I think that, you know, when I read the back of this book and when I read kind of the blurbs of it, you know, and it pulls out the thematic concepts, and they're all themes that are familiar enough to South African readers, possibly even to the point of wariness. We all are saturated with addiction, alienation, mental illness, generational trauma, toxic academic life of the author's alter ego. But what I think is special about this book is that in your handling, these subjects are kind of twisted into this crazy, I use the word postmodern, but I would also put the same disclaimer as Willie put on it, romp, that's so convoluted and stupidly crazy and ambitious that what impresses most is how in the end you know kind of everything manages to pull together, because there's so many strands flying, so many ideas, so much that's going on in this book. And yet you take us to a finale and to something of even a climatic finale. And so the world you build is largely familiar. It's a very familiar South Africa that you paint. And I love that about the book, that I know these streets, I know these places. It's a distinctly South African novel. And yet you continue to defamiliarize it by throwing together things that we simply aren't used to seeing sharing the page, and by leaping from one notion to the next, teasing together tendrils of thought into elegant argument, and then simultaneously unraveling them. So I think what I would really like to say is subtle gravity is not a work to be read once and put aside. It calls out for repeated readings, to read it again and again, in which we converse with the text in parallel to the narrator's own conversation, because it really is a sense of the narrator and the writer conversing with the text. And perhaps I would like to speculate or kind of, say is that, as the narrative suggests, if we go deep enough, we too will disappear through a portal, and if only for a moment, into a parallel world, another reality. So that's for anyone who hasn't yet read the book, and for everybody who has, pick it up again, go deeper, let yourself be pulled into a parallel reality, take the jump through the portal, so to speak. And so to that extent, it's very much a metafiction. It's a book about writing. And yet at the same time, Leonard, you express a deep suspicion, or it's a book that expresses, maybe let me rather say, a deep suspicion or even distrust of language. And I'll read a few quotes. They subsequently experience language as particularly violent shattering of that unity. And yet through the experience, the mystery is over. It is over. We brace ourselves and speak while we remain conscious of the little pang of pain, the pang of betrayal that accompanies the act of speaking. And another quote, language makes a difference. It differentiates you from me, this from that. We learn to live in a world broken by the power of language to make differences. But at the same time, it's a book that really revels in language and finds so much joy and pleasure in language. And I want to speak a bit about the stylistics, because my favorite bits in the book, the pieces that I love most are the bits on silence. And I do know that there's a wonderful irony that it's the writing of silence that I like most, but I also think it's some of your most striking uses of language are in those moments when you write silence. And I'll read a few little bits from the book as well, that's so to speak to what I'm saying about silence. The silence of things waiting to be said slowly gives way to a silence that knows no waiting, a silence that deepens until it gently engulfs him, so that it and not time become the measure of the moment. Luke closes his eyes and allow all the sounds to carry him to the center of a world where nothing makes a difference. The chattering of the birds in the trees outside the window, the faint sounds of the kitchen activity floating up from somewhere below them, which adds a brassy-like quality to otherwise pastoral symphony of chatter, dim voices, the whisper of a slight breeze outside the treetops, his own breathing, which always seems to conduct a symphony of the world so that not a single sound even sounds out of place. There is no difference between the sounds that are expected and those that are not. Sitting here is forever. Silence is eternal. And yet there is never just silence, just a stream of sound that float through his mind as if they were not there. And yet he hears silence if it allows his mind to slip through the sounds. That's where it is, there, in the split second where the breeze subsides, the rustle of leaves calm down, at the same moment where there is a lull in the chatter of birds and the collective pause in the kitchen below. There, silence becomes audible when the whole world briefly pauses to collect itself like an eddy behind a rock, when all the different pauses coincide. The majestic silence itself, the silence that could burst to found itself, becomes audible. It's gonna have to drink some water.
God, that is beautiful. Did you write that?
I did. You know, just one of those things I knocked up in preparation for this. So it's really a paragraph that I think for me captures some of the defining stylistic traits of the novel. And I think, you know, its attempt at sensory detail, it really is a sensory novel, but it's also a very embodied form of writing, even as you write this embodiment. And with a wonderful musical air, and in your uses of silence, and your use of these long loping sentences. Sometimes you have these paragraphs that are one single sentence. And I mean, I had to drink water after that. There's often that sense I got where I had to, at the end of a piece, go, breathe, because you just lead us, and you don't want to stop because the sentence keeps pulling you forward. You know, so you really do that. So, and then also your uses of repetition and variations on the theme, which of course in music, you talk about repetition as in addiction, but of course it's also a very, very musical technique. And of course in music, it becomes refrain. And I wanted to lead from that to my question, which is, Leonhard, you are also a composer. And I loved the music of this book at some moments. I really could hear this book at some moment. And I was wondering what the relationship between for you, the relationship is between composition and writing, and how you play with that relationship. And then secondly, a little bit more of a fun question, the pop question, because this is a book that's both deep and pop. So the pop question is, if this book was a song or a symphony or a tune or a composition, which one would it be?
Okay, so let me get to the first one.
Composition and writing. Composition and writing.
The relationship between composing and writing. It is exhausting. It has exhausted me. But it's very interesting that you pick up on that, because in my academic career, it happened, I think, twice, that the reviewers commented on my writing by saying things like, this has a musical flow to it, and particularly the long sentence. the long cascading sentence. It's like diving into water, and you know, there's a use of the parenthesis and the parenthesis within the parenthesis, and it's a culmination. But it's also a little bit like sex. You know, it's a bit like a more of a woman's experience, I suppose, of orgasm than a man's. Is the idea that it is coming, but it never comes. And I think what I really love about writing is this idea of playing with clarity to come. I like the build-up. And I like the parentheses, I like the commas, I like the long sentence, because it is always in anticipation of the drop. If you want to talk in techno music terms, you know, there's the drop. The drop is always nice, but it's also always a bit disappointing because then it's over. So, yeah,
fantastic.
But I want to say another thing, sorry, in response to that. Elegance. The relationship between elegance and truth is underestimated. How much truth is there in elegance, and how much truth is conveyed by elegance? Not because of what it is, what it does, and what it says, but of how it is said. And you know, this opens a big can of worms. We can go back to the sophists in Greek history, but you know, it's the beauty of the saying, it's not the argument. That's not where I'm going. I'm going with an elegance that is heartfelt is an argument in itself. If I can make a point elegantly, even I can get it wrong in what I'm saying, but the passion and the elegance with which I'm wrong could be the clincher. And I think that's what people respond to in great books. I mean, remembrance of things.
Absolutely. I mean, and I think I really relate to that because I'm a fiction writer, but I read philosophy. When I read philosophy, I read it almost in the same way as fiction, which is I'm largely reading it because there's some of the philosophers whose style I love. So I'm reading it for the elegance, the beauty of the writing, and I agree with you that contains a truth, and when something can be said with that, when the language can really be allowed to sing, that there is a truth in that always emerges. So very beautifully put. I'm looking at the time now, and we only have 10 minutes, and I'm very eager to hand over to the audience. So I'm going to have to stalk you later, Leonhard, and throw all my other deeply planned questions at you and keep you up to midnight answering them. But I'm going to skip to one that I do want to ask because I somehow feel like it's important.
Is this an audience question or is this a you question?
No, this is a me question. Then I'm going to hand over to the audience to ask their questions because we've only got 10 minutes left. So I'm going to ask one very quick question, which is that I wanted to, I mean, there's a lot to be said for the title, and Billy's talked a little bit about some of that, the subtlety, the gravity. There's an element of it tied to elegance, and they both words, subtlety and gravity, are both words that I think have, to an extent, aren't really used a lot. I don't hear subtle often, and yes, they're both also words that have scientific, spiritual meanings, and also literary meanings, or who exist in literary world. So there's something for me very special in the title, and the book itself unpacks the title quite extensively. So I'm not going to do that now, but I would like to raise one little thing that comes up in the unpacking of the title. So I'm going to read again, and then I'll ask you this, because I think it's maybe a nice place for us to formally close and hand over to the audience, which is to say, okay, wow, I say, realizing that I sound as impressive as I am, that redefines the entire meaning of politics, justice, and well, everything. Indeed, it does. And to understand the profound impact of prioritizing the subtle body as we do, just imagine our world by adding the word subtle as adjective to, well, everything. subtle politics, subtle justice, subtle democracy, I add wistfully, precisely.
Yep.
I wanted to draw that out because I feel like, I mean, I certainly know from my side, I feel like at the moment in the world, not even just in South Africa, we really are grappling for fresh ways to view, to think about. We become very disillusioned with things like democracy, like justice, and we're grappling for fresh ways. And I found this a very beautiful, fresh way to think, what if we rethink it through this lens? And I wondered if you would just very quickly, I don't know if it can be done very quickly, but just maybe say a little bit about what you understand by that, what that word subtle brings to ideas like justice.
I can do this very quickly in dialogue with Kundera. The problem with contemporary politics is not populism. It's an aesthetic problem. It's crass. It is brutal, it is crass, it is unsubtle. And the thing that Kundera does in Unbearable Lightness Being, with that short essay on kitsch, the world has become kitsch because it has become unsubtle. We do not pay attention to differences anymore. Paying attention to differences has become almost impossible. So, in a sense, that's what I'm going for.
Okay, no, beautifully put. I think
let's return to subtlety. Subtlety is the marker. Okay, sorry, I'll stop there.
No, I think that's beautifully put and very succinct and absolutely beautifully put. And of course, it is unpacked more in the book. So if you haven't yet, get your copy. There's a link in the chat where you can go buy it, buy a copy, read it, find out more about how to be subtle and elegant. But now I'm going to shut my mouth and hand over to everybody. If anyone would like to ask a question, I think we can do hands if people would like to appear in question. Otherwise, you also are very welcome to just type your messages into the chat and I can read them out, or your questions into the chat. Otherwise, if you would like to speak or are happy to speak, please do raise your hand and I'll hand over to you with the greatest of pleasure. Do we have any questions? They're embracing the silence I advocated earlier. Well, then, if we don't have questions, we have 5 minutes. Come on, Leonard, give us 5 minutes of reading. One last call. Any questions? Anyone who'd like to comment, question, ask, say something?
Instead of that, I'm going to read you a text that I got from my very dear friend Andre Drainville in Canada. No, he hates Canada. He says he can't call it Canada. He's in Quebec. He says, "How amazing is Stacy Hardy? You are lucky to have her as a reader. She brought out the best in you." That's it. I'm going to read the fucking thing. So
now you're making me blush. No, this is not mine. This is so not my night. This is your night. But if I can bring out some of the best in you, then I'm very happy to do it, because it was a book that I loved. And one of the gifts of being able to do this again is I had to read the thing again so I could pull out all the quotes that I wanted to use in talking about it and pull out the question. And it really gave me that sense. There's so much in this book. There's so many things, the second reading, that I just had missed in the first reading. So it really is a whirlwind. And I also would like to suggest that I could be wrong on this. I tried Googling it and got nowhere. So if anybody in the audience wants to correct me, please do. But I would like to propose that it is, in fact, the very first South African novel that references Star Wars. So if you need any more reasons to read it, there you have your reason to read it.
Can I pose a question? We have with us Professor Jason Worth from Seattle University, who's a Kundera scholar. You know, he's waving his hands at us being silly. I want to hear from him. I want to say, because we've actually, the reason I want to call upon him is because when I wrote Imitation, I thought it was such a weird novel that God knows who's going to be able to review this thing for the press. And he stepped up beautifully. And
Jason, can we hand over to you?
He's just been so fantastic. And I just want to say hello to him.
Leonard, hello. Hello, everyone. Greetings from faraway Seattle. It's still morning here. Both novels are brilliant, and this was a brilliant evening. And I think I come to Leonard's work in, I suspect, some of the same ways that Leonard came to his own work, which is my training is also philosophy. And I think we hit a wall. And I think Billy's comments earlier really touched one of the really central issues. You know, the philosophical novel really is just philosophy by other means. And you think, well, what has a novel added? Nothing. I mean, it's just, if you've got a philosophical point, just tell me what it is. Why are you writing a novel? The real challenge is, I mean, Kundera loves to quote Hermann Broch on this, what only the novel can do. That's the starting point. What is it able to do that, say, philosophy cannot do? And the elegance and its relationship to truth, complexity, subtlety. Kundera says about the novel, the world is always much more complicated than you think. And I think as a philosopher, even our own deformation professionnelle is to simplify things and clarify things, and it has a point. But the risk is always in therefore rendering them crass, rendering them over to the powers that we are, I think our vocation is to resist. And so I find it a spectacular triumph for thought, and one that redeems philosophical training by allowing it to escape the limitations of philosophy. I always think of what Nietzsche once said about my country person, Ralph Waldo Emerson. The first philosopher who learned to stop being a philosopher.
Sure.
So wonderful, wonderful evening. And it's wonderful work. If you haven't read it, both novels are absolutely gorgeous and deep. And for me, I just felt a deep kinship, as if Leonard were my own brother. That's so far away in two different worlds we live, such a deep solidarity of thought and sense of what thinking can be.
Oh, lovely. Jason, can I ask you a question quickly? Because I've never met you and we've actually never talked, but there's a question that haunts me. The confusion of politics with aesthetics. When Kundera says populism is kitsch, communism is kitsch, what do we do with that? I mean, I can say, you know, really bad thinking is kitsch. It's ugly.
Yes.
Is that a confusion?
Well, I mean, yeah, I take Kundera is very, very serious on this. It is the crassness of politics, as you mentioned earlier, is one of the world's great problems. It's not going to respond to global problems like climate change or global economic inequality or the failings of capitalism. That's just on a very practical level. But I think there's a much deeper point. Kitsch was not bad art. Kitsch is pseudo art posing as art. It gives up the entire spectrum of what art can be by faking it. And if philosophy has its own parallel doppelganger, and that's sophistry. Sophistry looks like philosophy, but it betrays the spirit of philosophy. And so I would then say, philosophy is always battling sophistry, but even when philosophy succeeds, it's still not yet at the level of complexity and subtlety of our finest thinking. I mean, I think philosophy's own betrayal is that it somehow assumed with no argument that it had a monopoly on wisdom, that it had a monopoly on the best ways to address our times. And I think that's not true. I like the comment earlier, you know, reading philosophy in a more literary spirit, as in, you know, not allowing philosophy to have its own monopoly, because I think, yeah, I'm not so sure there's a way forward for the world, but if there is, it's not through replacing one crass paradigm with another crass paradigm. It's not possible. It's not going to work practically, but also it's a betrayal of everything that we would value.
Yo, Jason,
It is kitsch.
that was beautiful. So you're saying kitsch is to art as sophistry is to philosophy.
Yes, I agree. That is exactly my point. And they both are pseudo. The problem with politics globally is, and I don't think all that highly of philosophy. Philosophy is much farther below. I mean, politics is much farther below philosophy. And I think philosophy, needs to own up to what only the novel can do. That being said, as lowly as politics may be, or political science may be, it's not what you see in the world today.
Yeah.
It's kitsch.
Yeah.
It's kitsch. It's not serious.
Okay, so how's this for a thought? Is that, I mean, there's something very nice about the binary that you set up, but it is still a binary. It sets up kitsch versus art and sophistry versus philosophy when we know there's something kitsch in all art and there's some sophistry in all philosophy. Is the true art of the novel then not that it undermines that binary and brings us back to a true appreciation of truth and elegance and all of that beyond that opposition, which does seem a little bit easy, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I would think of them, I wouldn't conflate the two and I wouldn't separate the two. I'd think them not as a binary, but as a non-duality. They're inseparable and they're involved in each other, but they're distinguishable. But they have no life on their own. I mean, you just pull them into freestanding distinctions, then it's like pulling a fish out of the water. It loses its life.
Right.
But really to think how the two work together. Now, I think Kundera said something very interesting about philosophy's relationship to the novel on a very practical level that I take very seriously. He had in mind Hermann Broch's masterpiece, The Sleepwalkers. And in the third of the three novels, there's a philosophical essay on the degeneration of values and the rise of the Sachlichkeit. And this essay, if it was not just dropped in there as is, would be a work of philosophy. Changing not one word and just interpolating it into the novel, in which it was a feature among other features, it had already in that alone a new complexity.
Right.
So, it just entered the universe of the novel, as he puts it, and the universe of the novel gave it a different valence. And in a way, it became more powerful, even though not one new word was added to it. It became a strand in the complexity. And so I think in the spirit of complexity, of course, in the final analysis, we need modes of thinking in which we can see how the strands of kitsch and sophistry intertwine.
Right.
And so it's just a preliminary distinction that is non-dual. And of course, the key is to think in its proper complexity.
So that we can boldly go where no one's gone before.
Yeah, or keep trying.
I'm going to end it there because that is the perfect ending for this book. So we do have a question. So handing over to Hannah Craig. I think you had your hand up. Yes, please go ahead, Hannah. Hannah, hello.
Well, she typed into the box thing something about Harry Potter. Ooh, okay. Hannah, are you there?
We're not hearing you.
You see me?
Yes, now we're hearing you. Thank you.
Cool. This is Daniel, not Hannah. And the question about Harry Potter was from the third person that is here, Ange. So my question has to do with character. Part of what I was hearing in terms of the mention of it kind of stretching and maybe going beyond something postmodern, along with Leonard's openness to, maybe we might say, like the life in a character. So this kind of receptivity and then letting a character speak through him in the writing. A word that comes to mind is archetype, maybe. So the writer's openness to character in this way maybe gives that kind of life that was being spoken about. My question is whether the characters are now silent if they've left you alone, Leonhard.
Well, you raised, hello Dan, you raised two complex issues. Jung and the archetypes. I see we've got Susan on board, who's a vehement Freudian who hates Jung. But I love Jung. So Susan, sit on your hands. Yes, I think what we struggle to understand is how we are spoken. And we are, particularly us in the West, we kind of grappling and reaching for paradigms in which to articulate what it means to be spoken by the truth. So, you know, one orthodox way would be to say it is faith revealed. Another way would be to say it is my unconscious speaking. Another way would be say it's the archetypes articulating themselves through me. And it's in the nature of the question that we can't decide which one of those is the true way in which we are being spoken, because it begs the question. You know what I'm saying? If I were to make a judgment, who would I be speaking by of? Which one of those would be speaking through me? So it's a kind of a non sequitur, but so it goes back to, ironically, belief in a sense, and trust, and what you want of and from your life. You go, and this is, I'm now speaking for myself. I go, I know that there's a speaking through me. I know certain paradigms don't work and certain paradigms do work. I like the Jungian paradigm. I think Freud is limited. I prefer Jung because the scope of the speaking is bigger. I'm distrustful of much of what's going down as new age-y sort of stuff. At the end, you have to find your own way and make your own decision as to what you name that thing that you recognize speaks through you. And the important thing is not what you name it. The important thing is that you recognize that you are spoken, that you don't speak. That's the most important thing. What you name it is by the by, it's neither here nor there. Because there's no answer to that question.
Yeah, I suppose I'm not too concerned with the name particularly. More because to be spoken, is there like a hope for the speaking to be done, to be silent? Like, how's that relationship with, is it eternal speaking? Is that taken up as a duty or a task, or is it something that's done as like a purging or a wanting to be silent?
No, I think once you open yourself to the possibility that you don't speak, that you are being spoken, you hand over the job of living to becoming. So the Buddhists call it nirvana. Nirvana has a bad name. In the West, they confuse it with being. It's not that. It's eternal becoming. Eternal change. If you can open yourself up to that, you don't ask the question that you just asked, is it going to come to an end and all of that? Because you know, it's just eternal becoming. And there is, in a very strange way that I can possibly only discuss with philosophers while I bore them to death, is, in a sense, subtle gravity grapples with the original question posed by Parmenides. Is it about becoming or being? It's the origin of Western philosophy. being or becoming. And the point I want to make, I think the point that was made through me in the writing of Subtle Gravity was, it is just becoming. Language is becoming. Coming to the world is an eternal process. There's no end. And that is fine. That is beauty in itself. Knowing that it is not, there is no end. It's not coming to an end. It's the hardest thing, of course, to make peace with that. In fact, you know.
Thank you so much both. And I think that, well, it is never coming to the end and it's never ending. We are in fact coming to the end. We're a little bit over time, which I think is fine. If there is a last question, I'll happily take it. Otherwise, go home and read. Well, you're probably at home already, but close the screen, put down the computer and go read a book.
Can I just say thank you, Stacy? And Willie?
Yeah, and thank you to everybody who came. Thank you to KwaZulu-Natal Press for publishing the book, for organizing this, hosting us all. And especially thank you to everyone who came. And especially thank you to Leonhard.
Luke. And Leonhard says, thank you, Luke.
And we will thank Luke as well.
I blame Luke for all of this.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Have a beautiful evening. Good night.
Bye.
Stacy, I just wanted to thank you from UKZN Press as well for everything that you did this evening. It was a lovely way of tying so many different threads together and giving people the opportunity to also think about it in different ways. So thank you very much to you. And I see Willie has already left, but thank you to both of you for being such brilliant discussants, panelists.
Well,
we really
had a lovely
appreciate it.
book and yeah, so it was easy in that way. And thank you to you guys for holding this and for publishing the book, as I say. And everybody, good night. Thank you.